Good evening, everyone. I was wondering why they have a chair. It's for my bag. How thoughtful of you. So I'm going to try to keep it under 15 minutes. And I am under pressure because many in the crowd have already heard me speak several times. I don't want to bore them. So I'm going to do it differently this time. This conference is titled Israel, a Light unto Nations. And for those who don't know me, I'm half Syrian, half Lebanese, as Meira just mentioned. And I'm going to tell you who's in the crowd, for example. There is Rabbi Shalom Schwartz, who treats me like a daughter, and he founded Aseret, that was mentioned earlier. And Matanya, who works with him, who treats me like a sister. We enjoyed a kosher burger recently in Brooklyn, New York. Yoav, who used to work with them, now he's with Rachel Moore. His Excellency, the ambassador, and his wife. We enjoyed a Shabbat dinner at Fleur Hassan Nahum. Avi, Rachel, who hosted me in Neve Daniel for Shabbat, where we had just a small group come say hello to me. They ended up being 74 over Shabbat, Rachel. There is Sarah Sassoon here, who listened to me many times. She's like a sister. I've been hosted by her so many times in Katamon. And the list goes on. There's Nancy Pomegranate. The first time I celebrated my birthday, I don't normally celebrate, but I did last year in Tel Aviv. She hosted me. She even hired a private chef for us. There are so many people in the room that I've recently met in Brooklyn, a Lebanese Jewess who became like a sister. Rafi, thank you for coming. I'm telling you this not to bore you, but to tell you how special this is for me. I grew up in Lebanon through several wars with Israel. I'm an Arab Zionist, and I always make sure that, especially to the leftist journalists, I rub that in. And they often accuse me of being indifferent to the suffering of the children in Gaza, and I tell them, how dare you? I think when I fight against Hamas, I'm doing more for the children of Gaza than all those journalists combined. I grew up in war, and we could always tell when Israel flew above us. The sound of the airplanes used by the IAF are very easy to recognize. The building would shake, and even if the rocket falls really far, you as a child shiver. You don't know if it'll fall next on your house. I grew up with hatred and with frustration because I never understood the Lebanese attitude that resembles the Israeli attitude even during war. My parents and the neighbors who would come to us because we were on the ground floor would have whiskey, use a candle when there's no power, play cards. And I was always wondering, why aren't they trying to do something to stop our reality? Why aren't they trying to do something? As if war is part of our existence, you just accept it. And it's because we all think we're just one person. What can we change? We gave up on the Middle East conflict. In Europe, when I hear lecturers or politicians make this joke, when they say this is our vision for the coming 5 years, and we're not trying to solve the Middle East problem, to imply that their plan is realistic, I always interrupt and I say it's not funny. Because back where I come from, people die. You have a moral obligation to try and solve the Middle East problem. It's not funny. But I also was one of those people who thought, I'm just one person, what can I change? That was after I grew up an anti-Semite, hating Israel and the Jews and the Zionists, and I always make sure I mention the three terms because they are used interchangeably. No, anti-Semites do not make a distinction between Zionist and Jewish and Israeli, especially not in the Arab world. And I grew up in a country, Lebanon, that was occupied, or the South was occupied by Israel. So whatever we were told on TV, whatever the intelligent people who wrote in the newspaper told us, we believed it. Nobody told us that for more than 10 years, Yasser Arafat and his gang and every leftist around the globe who sympathized with the Palestinian cause, from Germany to Italy to Japan, abused Lebanese territory and repeatedly sent terrorists who targeted Israeli civilians. After more than 10 years of Israel exercising or trying restraint and given diplomacy a chance, the Israelis opted for a military action to create a buffer zone in the south, something Israel was trying to create recently. When I moved to Europe, after everything I was taught about the Zionists, the Jews who come from Eastern Europe, who came and took Palestine as if Palestine was a country, I went and I lived in the Jewish quarter. By chance, I lived in the Jewish quarter in Strasbourg, near one of the biggest synagogues in Europe. And I thought that the Jewish quarter in Strasbourg will be like the Jewish quarter in Damascus or in Beirut, no Jews. And when I arrived there, I realized it was packed. But before I connected the dots, upon my arrival, I went across the street to a grocery store. I went shopping, and I was happy to find the same ingredients I needed to cook, the same spices. I did not know what a kosher store is, so I did not connect the dots. And while I was picking spices, I heard men enter the store. And I was thinking in the back of my head, they're not speaking French. I realized it was Hebrew. But I've never spoken to a Jew. I certainly have never spoken to an Israeli, because it's illegal for us to speak to Israelis even if we meet them abroad on holiday. I realized it was Hebrew because Israel occupied South Lebanon when I was a child. So back in my days, we had televisions that had antennas we needed to adjust. And sometimes it wasn't one of our 3 channels, it was the Israeli channel, and we were allowed to watch 20 minutes cartoon in the afternoon. So if it was biblical cartoon from Israel, we watched. If a grown-up walked into the room, they would freak out and change the channel. You're watching Israeli TV. And until that day in Strasbourg, until that afternoon, I did not know that even the language was associated with taboo in my head, because I had a panic attack when I turned and I saw the 4 men, and they were dressed in white and black, Haridim, and with long sideburns. They were definitely Jews. I left my stuff, not only my shopping, my bag, my personal belongings in the trolley, and I ran out. I did not look left and right. I ran up to the 3rd floor where my bedroom was, and I locked the door. I didn't know what a panic attack is. If I was the fearful type, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. Yet, I knew that I couldn't breathe, and I looked in the mirror to calm myself down, and I saw how red and sweaty I was. And I felt so embarrassed. I felt like a fool. And I thought, that was stupid, because I left my personal stuff in the store. I had to go back and get it. And I had to see the storekeeper for long. So I decided to lie to the storekeeper. I went back, the man had left. I told him that I forgot my wallet. I continued shopping as if nothing happened. I went to pay. The storekeeper asked me, where are you from? And I thought, well, now he's going to have a panic attack. I'm half Syrian, half Lebanese. When he insisted the Middle East was not enough for him, and he asked me, how long have you lived in the neighborhood? I told him I just arrived today. He knew what happened. He knew that I was lying. He looked at me, he smiled, he connected the dots faster than I did. And he was pleasant. We had a chit-chat, he helped me with my bags, and by doing so, he allowed me back in the space. He invited me back in the space. That gentleman that day, without intending to, converted me from an enemy to an ally. I went back to my room and I thought for weeks, why on earth did you react this way? They did not even look at you. And I concluded that for the first time in my mid-20s, the first time ever, I was sharing the same space with the Jew, the enemy. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself, why is the Jew the enemy? And I realized that everything I know about Israel and the Jews, I learned from the one and only former Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, who died recently, not of old age. So it made sense to start there. I started looking him up, seeing his early statements, videos, what was written about Hezbollah, and I stumbled over one of his old videos in black and white, and I was one of Hezbollah's biggest fans. Like all those useful idiots you see in the West today who root for Hamas, I thought that they were heroes. They were the only ones who dared challenge or defy the occupiers, the Israelis. But then I heard in his videos Hassan Nasrallah saying, we in Hezbollah do not acknowledge political borders. We would like Lebanon to become an extension of an Islamic state, not the one ISIS wanted recently, the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I was shocked. I grew up in a secular home, an atheist, and I told myself, I did not subscribe to this agenda. Do people know? Of course, people knew because Hezbollah's manifesto was published in the newspapers in Lebanon upon its founding. I was filled with anger when I started reading the history of our region, especially that everything sounded so obvious. For example, the Jews did not come from Eastern Europe. Where do we read on and on about Bnei Israel in the Quran itself? So maybe they're indigenous to the land. Everything I learned about the Ottoman Empire collapsing, I learned that at school. How did I not think that Lebanon is not much older than Israel, that Iraq, Syria, in their recent forms, the very concept of the nation state is modern. Jordan wasn't a country, and Jordan is my favorite. Before I talk about Jordan, I conclude, I'd like to tell you that I make sure I tell this story about the storekeeper, especially to youngsters, to the young Jews in high schools, at universities. And I tell them, whether you're religious or not, whether you keep kosher or not, whether you know what a challah is or not, and I met those teenagers in California, you are an ambassador of the Jewish people. Because we are human beings and we tend to generalize, people will judge the entire Jewish people by the way you behave. And that man in the store, that storekeeper, transformed the trajectory of my life. And I went back to the Middle East and I tried to tell them, to share my discoveries, and they were all obvious. People were not interested, especially that the Middle East conflict is very complex. Nobody wants to spend days or months reading about the history of our region. So I gave up and I thought, I'm just one person, what can I do? I went back to Europe and I exercised soft diplomacy, something the West really likes. I worked with Israelis and Americans on Holocaust education. This is the way to cure the world from anti-Semitism, although I disagreed. I always thought that they lacked the sense of urgency. They did not realize that while we celebrated the historic signing of the Abrahamic Accords, the counter-camp, the so-called axis of resistance, which resists modernity, was plotting to disrupt, to obliterate every bridge we built. Until October 7th, until I watched the videos filmed and shared by Hamas. And as a woman, as a mother, that shook me to my core. And I realized it doesn't matter whether we're one person, no matter how small you are, you are able to make a difference. For me, the difference, the calling in my heart was to come to Israel. To come here, to go to the Kotel and say, Hineni, I responded to the call in my heart. Now what am I supposed to do? Since then, just by being vocal and stating, condemning Hamas in public, and saying that I side with Israel, I became a public speaker spoke around the world, including Panama City, and I do make a difference. I'm not telling you this to brag about my power, because we need you to roll your sleeves up, because we are dramatically outnumbered. What we have on our side is quality. Quality, we bring quality versus quantity. We are dramatically outnumbered. This is why we need everybody to roll their sleeves up and try and contribute and push against this tide of anti-Semitism. When we talk, just concluding with the last notion, my favorite country in the Middle East, Jordan. What brings me together with many of those Jews who treat me like family, who are indeed a light unto nations, because they did transform my life, and I hope I touched them in a way. I do have a family. Those friends I have here, and many others I have not necessarily in this hall, treat me like family, not because they want to pamper me, because this is who they are. And I support Israel, and I learned a lot. I spoke to thousands of Israelis, and I'm not exaggerating. I traveled around Israel. I always avoided going to Judea and Samaria until this friend, Gedalia, tells me, come, would you like to visit a settler family? This is like a topic I avoid because this is volatile in Europe. But I had the feeling that I had to go. And I went there, and they showed me around. And after that, when I was looking at the Jordan Valley, I was thinking, from now on, I'm no longer apologizing. If you have the right as a Jew to live in Tel Aviv, you definitely have the right to live in Judea and Samaria. I do not even understand what the discussion is about. So I say out loud, the Palestinian cause was liquidated on October 7th. They're doing, not ours. They opted for terrorism yet again. But this time, it was the last time. And it's up to us to ensure it is the last time. And for Israel to prevail, for Israel to avoid another October 7th, Israel has to become whole. I don't say this because I'm bigoted and I hate the Palestinians. It's because I care about the children in Gaza that I say this, because they've proven unfit for governing, unsafe for their own children, and it's about time the world reminds them of what we mean when we say Palestine. The British mandate of Palestine was already divided. 78% of the land was given, gifted, granted, carved up, and made Jordan. They could have called it Palestine. They called it Jordan. And it bothers nobody on planet Earth that the royal Hashemite family stems from the Arabian Peninsula, from today's Saudi Arabia. It bothers nobody on the planet that they received such a big chunk of land. What bothers me is that if you read their history, you find no achievements. What is the innovation? What is the added value they brought to the Middle East? Yet, Queen Rania has the audacity to lecture Israel on the morality of the war in Gaza while they refuse to receive their own people, to rescue their own people. Please look up what happened on May 13. 17 children, Gazan children, were returned from Jordan to Gaza. Their parents gave interviews to the CNN, to the BBC, crying, begging the Jordanian government to allow them to stay. One said, my 5-year-old daughter just had an open heart surgery. I do not know if I have access to medication. If I need it, please allow us to stay. They were returned. So do not allow anybody anymore to step on your feet, to push you in a corner, and remind your children as well of what we mean when we say Palestine. Thank you so much for listening.
If you are not yet a subscriber to our daily, belief-based, inspiring, politically incorrect, truthful videos about Israel, the Jewish people, and the freedom-loving world, what are you waiting for? Go to pulsevisual.com and click to subscribe today. And yes, we are a donor-based operation. We need your donations for support in order to make these videos and get our videos seen and do all the work we do. So every once in a while, whether a large donation or a small donation. Just go to pulseofisrael.com and click on the donate button. Shalom, everyone, and thanks for watching.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.